Hi everybody. Today's video is going to be entirely kind of theory and lecture, so there won't be much singing or dictation. I would encourage you to have a notebook handy and try to sketch down some things and any questions or thoughts that you may have, because we have kind of a huge topic to cover today that I don't, because of the nature of this class, there's not a ton of detail I can get into, so I have to give you a kind of crash course in pragmatic understanding of what set theory is. So, when talking about post-tonality, function and scale are gone. So when we say function, I mean that fa resolves to mi, ti goes up to do, or we think of like modulating between different scales, but each scale has its own kind of similar functional quality. These are not necessarily a factor anymore in 20th century composition. Intervals now drive composition, and pitch is not as important, and scale is not as important as interval. So centricity, the idea of like a pitch being kind of an anchor, so like a tonic, is de-emphasized or gone entirely. And instead, what we call operations, inversion, transposition, retrograde operations, these are what take precedence, okay? So when I say inversion, I mean flipping interval sizes. So for instance, instead of ascending up a major third and then up a minor third, we can go down a major third and down a minor third, for instance. So inverting and so on. That's one way to manipulate pitches. Transposing, which we know, what have you, and then retrograde, which is where where you reverse the order of pitches. So instead of doing this, you do this, right? This gets increasingly complicated as these operations can be combined. So you can have a retrograde inversion, you can have something transposed. It can get kind of complicated, but that's the basic principle, okay? And in order to talk about pitches, we organize music into what we call sets. Sets can be as small as 2 notes or as long as all 12, and these become the building blocks of our pieces. Many sets can occur at the same time, and sets can be either directly related to each other or they can be completely distinct and still happening concurrently. So the way that composers create sets and manipulate them in order to create different intervals and in order to kind of manipulate space in these internal components of these sets is what drives post-tonality and kind of the creation of this kind of aesthetic of post-tonality. So let's talk about how we can kind of organize music into sets. Now, in order to do this, we don't want to think of pitch anymore in terms of notes and flats and letters. We can think of pitch in terms of integers. So I've showed you this before, briefly last quarter. We can think of pitches now as being, instead of 1 through 12, being C, C sharp, D, D flat, C, what have you. In order to kind of remove any sort of tonal context, in order to better look at distance and relationships between pitches, we can set them as integers. So for instance, we can call C 0. We can call E flat 3. We can call A 9. We can call G 7, and so on. And this goes up to 0 again. We never hit 12. In this case, we're referring to what we call pitch classes, where when we say 0, that refers to all C's in any octave, right? We can also think of intervals as integers as well, where the distance between pitches can be reduced to an integer. So a unison is 0. You've gone nowhere. A minor third we can call a size of 3. 1, 2, 3, right? Same thing goes in both directions, right? We could have, of course, major sevenths, which in this case is 11, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? And I want to address 2 quick things about this kind of integer-based thinking. Pitches, and sometimes intervals, pitches are mod 12, okay? So notice that 10 and 11 are T and E instead of 1 0 and 1 1. That's because if we put 1 0, it looks like 0 and 1. So we use T to distinguish it from 0 and 1. And when you get up to the top, you reset. So for instance, if I were to say, what is 8 plus, let's say 5, okay? 8 plus 5 in simple addition is 13. But we don't have a 13. It's mod 12. We only go up to 11, 0 to 11 being our 12 pitches. So what we do is we can take our new number and subtract 12 from it to get us our new number. So when we say 8 plus 5 gets us 13, 13 minus 12 is 1. That means that when we go 5 semitones up from 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we get to 1. We go from the analogous G sharp to C sharp, and so on, okay? What I would do to familiarize yourself with these is practice, keep a couple intervals in mind and their sizes, and then keep a pitch collection in mind so that you can keep integers. So I would recommend, if you remember, commit to memory that a C dominant 7th chord is 0, 4, 7, and 10. If you can remember just those 4 as being that entity on a keyboard, you can then kind of get to the other ones quicker, okay? Same thing goes for intervals. Intervals, because 0 to 12 is an octave, of course, so half of an octave is a tritone, for instance. Minor second is 1. A major third is 4, and stuff like that. So I would do your best to try to remember these relatively quickly, because we'll begin to start referring to pitches and intervals in terms of numbers, because the pitch itself becomes less important in post-tonal music, okay? So if the mod 12 thing is a little bit confusing, there's another way that we can kind of, I guess, a parallel track of how we can conceive of pitches. We can also think of them as being on a clock face. So if we put all 12 pitches on a clock face, just like a watch, with 0 at the top, and then going up to the right and going down to the left, we can draw some comparisons here. And we can actually use clock faces to draw certain kind of conclusions about pitches and sets. So for instance, if we were to take a very simple set, a C major triad, think about what drawing lines between the pitches of C major triad would look like on your clock face. So you could either pause this and draw it out, or you could hold on a second, we can move on to that. This also helps us show things like symmetry, and helps us with things like inversion and transposition and stuff like that. So for instance, C major looks like that. C to E to G, okay? Notice how it's not symmetrical, because our traditional tonal music is not symmetrical. Our scales aren't symmetrical, our chords aren't symmetrical. And that's why when we've been doing the symmetrical scale stuff in the past weeks and also last quarter, that's why they sound quite different, because symmetry is not the common practice in a kind of classical and romantic sense of composition. So let's think about something else then. Let's think about what a symmetrical set would look like. So what does a fully diminished 7th chord look like? If we start on C, for instance, you would get this. Notice that we start at 0, and then a minor third is 3, a minor third is 3, which gets us 6, a minor third is 3, which gets us 9. 0, 3, 6, 9, equally dividing the octave into 4 pieces, right? And you can see that represented as a cube, not a cube, as a square. It's completely symmetrical, okay? If you were to invert it, you would just get the same thing, okay? And transposing it, it just goes around. And this also helps you show how there's limited transpositions of these as well, okay? Let's do another one. What does an octatonic scale look like? Remember, octatonic is alternating half steps and whole steps. So if we start at 0 and ascend by half step and then whole step and then repeat that pattern, we get something that looks a little bit like this. Okay? Again, also symmetrical. Okay? Notice that if you were to split it down the middle, it would be the same on both sides. Okay? From anywhere that you would divide it, you'd get the same thing. 0, 1. Okay? And then you go from 1 to 3, 4, 6, 7, 9, 10. See that? How we're skipping certain pitches, okay? Clock faces are really useful for recognizing kind of how pitches react spatially, because again, intervals is a big component of post-tonal music. And thinking about intervals is useful to think about distance. And when we have clock faces, they're also useful for showing us, as I mentioned, things like transposition. If you were to just take all of your lines and shift them in a direction, that's how you could transpose something. In this case, inverting it wouldn't do much good. But retrograding it, you could also think of moving, instead of going, say, forwards, you can think of going backwards, and so on. Okay? So let's talk about something called trichords. Trichords for us is going to be the harmonic, what's the word I'm looking for? For the time being, it's going to be kind of what's going to replace our harmonic dictations, so to speak. In the sense that we can play trichords as harmonic entities, and I can ask you to define what I'm playing. Trichords, as the name implies, are sets that only contain 3 notes. And because of our operations, transposition, inversion, retrograde, and the numerous possibilities that you can get from those, we actually have limited options if we think of removing duplicate trichords when they're transposed, okay? So we've been working with sets for months. These are our interval chains. Interval chains are just sets melodically, okay? For our purposes, we're going to be thinking of trichords as harmonic entities, okay? So when we look at trichords, all of these sets are transposed to start with 0 and are arranged to fit in their most compact form. So this is called their prime form. Prime forms are useful because it's a really quick way to figure out what the interval and pitch content of these would be. And also they serve as kind of shorthands because these can then, of course, be transposed and added together to create complicated music, okay? And as mentioned before, we're limited in our options. There's not that many of them, and in fact, I can put all of them on a single slide, okay? Here is all the possible trichords in their prime form, okay? So notice that I've organized these to where the first interval is kind of how these go. Notice it's relatively systematic. So if this is 0, 0, 1, 2. This is just a chromatic cluster, okay? If you have 4 of these, you get the chromatic scale, right? 0, 1, 3 becomes our octatonic scale when you add those together, right? Right? 014, okay, is like a minor second and a major third. So almost kind of I don't know what you would. It's kind of like almost like Tito May, but I wouldn't really think of it that way. So we have 014, 015, and 016. 016 is a semitone and a tritone, right? Transposed anywhere else, that could be here, for instance. That could be here, right? And we can also expand these beyond the octave too. So 012, for instance, could be this. If I'm going to play G, F sharp, and F. When you condense those all to within an octave, you get a cluster that becomes, when you transpose it, 0, 1, 2. That's kind of the basic way that these sets and that these prime forms work for us. The next column, 024, should be familiar. It's 2 major seconds. When you have 2 024 sets, with one of them transposed up a tritone, you get a whole tone collection. Right? 025, 026, so a major second and a tritone, and then 027. Okay? 036 is also a familiar sound to us. It's a diminished triad. 036 is just a diminished triad. 037 is a minor chord, right? Very familiar to our ears. And because of how transposition inversion works, 037 is the trichord for all major and minor possible triads. Because of how transposition and inversion works, when you invert this, you get a major chord, and then when you transpose that major chord, you can get any major or minor triad. Okay. Finally, 048 is kind of on its own. 048 is interesting because it's also symmetrical, right? Because it divides the octave evenly into 3s. 048 is an augmented triad, right? 2 major thirds, right? So I know this is kind of a lot, but the more that we spend time with these, there's really not that many options here as far as trichords go. And thinking of them as harmonic entities isn't actually as tricky as it sounds. So let's think about what trichords look like on a clock face. What does 016 look like on a clock face? Okay, so start at 0, draw to 1, draw to 6, draw back to 0 again. Okay. In addition, when you have them on the clock face, you can see what intervals are possible with this set. So here's what it looks like. C to C sharp, you get a semitone, you get a minor second. C sharp to F sharp, you get a perfect fourth. F sharp to C, you get a tritone. Right? So trichords have a limited number of intervals within them because there's a limited number of notes. So you've got the distance between the first and second pitch, the second and third pitch, and the first and third pitch. Right? Only 3 intervals. Okay? That's part of what will help us dictate these, as we'll see in a little bit. Right now, try transposing this to begin on G sharp, on 8, and invert it. So instead of going up a semitone, up a perfect fourth, go down a semitone, down a perfect fourth. Okay? So if you wanted to pause that, you can go ahead and try that. If not, I'm going to go ahead and move on in real time. You would get this. Okay? So we still have 016. But now it's starting in a new place. And instead of going up, we're going down. Right? That's just a transposition and an inversion of this. See how they're similar? Again, it's subtle, but the more that we do this, the more our ears will become attuned to this kind of thing. Okay? Let's talk about singing and dictating trichords. Okay? I would recommend not singing pitches, but singing interval size. Now, if you keep this relative to its prime form, this could get a little confusing because what this means is if we want to sing 016, you start by singing 0, and then sing 1 as you ascend to semitone, and then sing 5 as you ascend to perfect fourth. This is a little bit tricky because you go, wait, why would I sing 015 when it's 016? Well, because the distance you're traveling is not the pitches that you're traveling. So try singing the same trichord, but starting on different pitches. So sing those intervals, 015, but starting somewhere else, starting on, say, 7. So 0, 1, 6. Okay, or, well, I just made the mistake. Pardon me. 0, 1, 5. Okay? We want to start thinking of singing intervals as being singing distances. Okay? Instead of just jumping from pitch to pitch. Because we haven't been teaching you so far to have a perfect pitch or a fixed do-based system. So in our context, I think it's best to treat things as singing intervallically rather than singing from pitch to pitch. Okay? Because if you hear, well, this is 2 016s in a row, that's easier than going, well, it's this, because then instead of having 6 things to keep track of, you only have 3. And if this is confusing, this will all be made clear the more that we do this, and we've got the rest of the quarter to kind of nail down this skill set. For dictation of trichords, listen for the internal interval relationships. So we've already done this a little bit. As thought experiments a couple of months ago, remember I gave you something like this? I gave you a chord where all the intervals within them are the same, and you had to tell me what it was. Same situation here. We've already been doing this, in a sense. So, for instance, in something, say I give you this. In your head, separate the pitches, separate the 3 pitches, and then hear the interval sizes between them, and then set them relative to 0. And then you figure out, okay, well, there's a major second here, so that's O2, and then there's a tritone there, so that's O2-6. That's kind of how you can go about doing this. This will take a lot of practice, but we're going to start where when we do dictation of trichords, they're all going to have 0 as their lowest pitch, they're all going to be in their prime form, and they're all going to have sets within the octave, okay? If I give you O2-6, I will play O2-6 in an octave. Eventually, however, we can transpose these, invert them, retrograde them, spread them out over an octave, right? Transpose it, right? And so on. And you'll still have to figure out what the trichord is by thinking about the interval relationships rather than just the pitches themselves. Okay, so don't worry, we'll get there together. Okay, so let's talk about what we're doing next time. So today's Monday. Next time we're stepping back a little bit because the first half of chapter 21, which we're getting to this week, is singing 20th century rhythms and extended tonal melodies. So we ended last week by talking about pandiatonicism briefly. We'll sing some of that material and sing music that is highly chromatic or doesn't really have a sense of pitch. Friday we'll do dictation of that material. We'll also get into 20th century rhythm, which is kind of an odd duck. Next week, we'll move into complete post-tonality. So we'll be singing and dictating symmetrical scales and sets, which we've had before, and we'll just have freely post-tonal music, where everything is just based on interval, okay? The problem with the curriculum is that a lot of you don't have any experience with post-tonal music, and I apologize for that, because you're still responsible to know it in this class, even if you're not responsible for the theory classes that offer it. So, I've put some extra theory help in the description. There's a website. I picked it because I think it's pretty good, but it's also concise. It's not too much to get through. But feel free to schedule extra office hours with me if you need them. And I would, if you can, take an hour during this week to look up some YouTube videos or to schedule a meeting with me to kind of go over some post-tonal fundamentals, because this video probably isn't going to be enough for you if you've never done this before. This was a very kind of quick and abridged way to through a lot of this material. So this is going to be a little bit of a struggle for some of us, but I think we can definitely get it. And I'm going to do my best to try to get us that theory that we need to sing all this stuff. In addition, I would ask all of you, try to listen to some post-tonal music. A lot of you haven't listened to it because you haven't had to play it and you haven't been forced to listen to it. And while you might have gotten to this stuff in history, maybe not yet, but maybe if you did, whatever. I would recommend try listening to some of it. Really, really dig in and focus on the material and try to hear it as interval-driven music and with the lessons that we've talked about a bit today. I have some pieces here that I've recommended because not only are they, I think, tremendous and beautiful and excellent pieces, but each of these also has an interesting dramatic idea tied to it that for those of you who need something to hold on to in the music, say it's the lyrics, say it's the story, say it's XYZ, these pieces are all not only post-tonal and exceptional in their quality, but they're also interesting in terms of what their story is, either in the piece or the story behind the piece. So, Alban Berg's Wozzeck is an opera. It's an hour and a half. It's short for an opera. There's a YouTube video online. If you just search Berg Wozzeck, you'll find it. In the 70s, there was a TV movie version that recorded the entire thing, and it's shot like a movie with English subtitles. It's not on a stage. So it's like watching a movie. And it's got a really interesting plot. Berg is so masterful at creating sets and getting things to get these really beautiful textures and to really bring a romantic sensibility to a lot of this set type stuff. So I'd really check that out. Arnold Schoenberg's got a piece. It's a collection of songs called Pierrot Lunaire, which is for solo voice and a chamber ensemble. And Pierrot Lunaire is all settings of poetry. And that's quite interesting. There's a lot of really interesting poems in there, and this kind of wonderful, expressionist, vivid poetry set to Schoenberg's music, and it's quite interesting. And again, if you like having something to grab onto, you can look up the poetry and read English translations alongside, and that might give you something to hold on to in the music. And then finally, Olivier Messiaen, Quatuor pour la fin du temps. Fin du temps. He wrote this wonderful piece. It's a quartet for the end of time. It's for 4 instrumentalists, and not only is it a tremendous piece where every movement has kind of a different compositional idea that kind of serves as germs of creation, but Messiaen actually wrote the piece in the 40s when he was in a German concentration camp, and he wrote it for musicians at the camp, and it was premiered at the camp. So the history of this piece is particularly interesting for a lot of reasons, and the piece is also just wonderful. It's an exceptional piece to listen to. So these pieces are all large-scale pieces. The quartets, half hour to 45 minutes. Purely is about the same, about like as I said, an hour and a half. So just pick any one of them and just listen to parts, or sit and watch a scene, or listen to a couple poetry. Like, I don't need you to listen to all these, because my goal by recommending this stuff to you and by bringing this in is because you haven't necessarily had the theory class for it. You may or may not get to it in any sort of detail in a history sequence. So I'm not looking for you to love this music. I'm not even looking for you to like this music. What I'm looking for is an aesthetic familiarity, that the things that sound unfamiliar are not unfamiliar anymore. This should not be unfamiliar to us by the end of this quarter, even though that it's more dissonant than, right? And in addition, I'm not expecting you to love this music or even to like this music, but if we could exit this class with an ability to sight read and to dictate post-tonal music, and an appreciation for its construction and for the type of work that these composers were doing in the 20th century, that's had an impact on tonal music as well, that's my goal. So again, I'm not looking for us to become, I'm not trying to convert you to post-tonal acolytes, but take a listen. If you want more recommendations, just let me know. There's tons of excellent pieces that I could recommend to you, and we're going to get to this together. This is going to be kind of a big task, but we've got the rest of the quarter to figure out sets, to get comfortable with post-tonality, and I'm going to do my best to get us all there in one piece. So with that, that's it for today. No homework or participation for right now. Information to come on Wednesday for that, and I will see all of you next time.